Right. So now we've got an issue with the paper. So there's more than one kind of resolution. So that I'm aware of. So there is the council staff recommendation, which I would like to move, but I'm also aware of the fact that Councillor McClellan has got an amendment. But I just want to kind of work through a voting issue, because in a way we want to get what I wouldn't want is to have something voted down and then the next one voted down.
So basically, I think we've got one first, and I think Melanie indicated she was happy to second it, so we can do that one, and then if not, then we have the staff recommendations of fallback.
No, it's the wrong way round. The point is that what I want to know is that, because I wouldn't support the amendment unless I knew that was the only alternative. So it's better as a foreshadowed motion. So we'll deal with the motion as per the staff recommendations. Yours is
It's a separate motion.
it's a separate motion, so it stands
I don't want
alone.
to foreshadow it, but that's fine. You're
yeah.
chairing the meeting. But
We could do it that way. Is that the easiest way?
There's only the residential bit that's different, that's commercial. It's the same.
The commercial's the same. It's
Yeah.
only one aspect
So if we
of
vote
it.
down the commercial on the first bit, that needs a 75% the next time. So we need to maybe split them out. That's all.
both
Yeah.
motions have the commercial in them, so I don't think
Okay.
Yeah.
it's at all, really.
All right. So we just
Against it the first time.
Yeah, put them separately, I agree.
But either which way the commercial is.
yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of the because what I don't want is for us to have an outcome where a whole thing would fall over, even though the majority would vote for a compromise. Yeah.
Can we maybe explain both motions?
Yeah.
That would be a good
Staff one is
idea.
I could perhaps explain mine,
Okay.
and then people know what they're getting.
Yeah. All right. So, but perhaps Brendan, if I hand over to you for the main resolution.
Sure. So I'll just make some introductory comments. So the focus of what I suggest that we talk about is the residential rebate scheme. Growing the central city population has long been and remains a key strategic priority of council. The central city population was decimated in the earthquakes, the resulting cordons and then the building demolitions that followed. So in 2011, the central city population was estimated at 8,290. In 2014, it fell to a low of 5,050. In 2019, the last census estimate, we were back up to 6,400 approximately. We believe that in 2021 we'll get back to where we were in 2011. So 10 years after the fact, we'll get back to where we were in 2011 in terms of central city population. To further grow the population requires both supply and demand solutions. So the DC rebate scheme is a supply side option that's designed to encourage developers to supply the market. In the last 4 years, approximately 270 homes per year have been built within the central city. And the DC rebate scheme, since its inception in 2014, has contributed 1,175 homes in the central city. It's impossible to speculate or to separate what would have been if it wasn't for the DC rebate scheme. And I know that's frustrating for councillors. I know that's a question that has been asked and may well be asked again. We simply don't have the ability to crystal ball gaze about what the volume of developments would have been if this hadn't been in place for the last 6 years. Developers have advised that the scheme is both important for residential development in the central city, and it's especially important to ensure an affordable price point in a very sensitive part of the market. And I appreciate the submitter's microeconomic background and it's accurate and factual, but the sensitivity and the emotion of purchasing homes are factors that can't be taken into account in the graphs. And there are also other incentives that seek, including government incentives and KiwiSaver and Homestart incentives, that do seek to distort the market, particularly at that particular price point of between $450,000 and $550,000. And what you heard the developer say is that it's a triangle. Most of the developments are at that lower end, far fewer as you go up the triangle, and that's where most of the buyers are as well. Residential developments in the central city reduce one of your frustrations, which is empty sites that then become Wilson car parks. They reduce eyesores created by the absence of development. And as is illustrated in Table 3 of the paper, they do increase the overall capital value and therefore the rates intake. And within a relatively short period of time, the examples that we've provided, and they're not specifically selected examples, the DC rebate is covered by the increased rateable value or the increased rates collection. This scheme was expressly intended, however, to facilitate residential development in the central city. We've just been talking about that. It's therefore for this reason that staff recommendation is for a restricted covenant, precluding the use of properties for short-term accommodation and or any other business or commercial use if a DC rebate is provided for. This doesn't solve the entire problem of posed by short-term accommodation or business and commercial. It's still a permitted activity, but it does solve it for where a DC rebate is sought and received. The staff advice is that DC rebate has and can continue to advance residential development in the central city, which is aligned with the council's strategic priorities. It's therefore our recommendation to continue with the residential DC rebate scheme with modifications to exclude the aforementioned short-term accommodation and commercial activities. Our recommendation is also to cease the commercial DC rebate scheme. We believe, and through the work that Gavin's done in liaising directly with developers, that the commercial scheme has served its purpose and is no longer required. Happy to answer any questions, Leanne.
Yep, good. Sarah?
Thank you. A couple of questions. Firstly, on the comment you just made about the rates and intake increasing and paying back the equivalent quite quickly. My understanding was that actually the rates take doesn't increase just if the value of the property increases, but it just spreads it further between the ratepayers because they become ratepayers
Yes.
because council actually decides on the rates take that we do. So it doesn't actually increase the rates take, it spreads it between more ratepayers.
Yeah, so any therefore increase in rates or the share of rates is reduced for other ratepayers.
Yeah, but it doesn't increase the take, infrastructure payments. So my understanding is that some developments have gone ahead, some residential developments have gone ahead without the DC rebates because there's been DC credits on the sites. Mm-hmm. Do we know sort of what percentage have had the DC credits versus those that have needed the rebate?
No, we haven't been able to pull that information.
Okay, but there's quite a number that have gone ahead without this, which has
Well,
been...
most of them will have rebates on the site, but they won't have for the number of properties that they're putting there, is that right?
So that's my next bit. Yeah.
The key to the difference between whether a rebate is provided or not is the level of credits on the site.
That's right.
And so the developments that have claimed rebates tend to be larger, more intensive development, which is what the council's seeking in the central city versus a single home, replacing a single home, for example, where a rebate wouldn't be required.
And so the reason we would have been charging them development contributions over and above the credits is because they would be placing more demand on the current infrastructure, which would then need to, at some point, be increased over time at the cost of the ratepayers.
Yes, they're paying for that additional demand on infrastructure.
Yeah, so it's not simply a case of the infrastructure's already there, why are we charging for it? There's increased pressure on the infrastructure that over time will need upgrading as more and more developments come in.
They're paying because the existing credits only go so far. So
That's right. So
the DC policy isn't an exact science.
No.
It is washed out, and there's some subsidisation between any developments.
That's right. Yeah, but the general principle is you're paying for increased demand on the infrastructure.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we do want to have a debate about this as part of an entire review of our development contributions policy,
Yes.
which does require an overhaul. And I know Councillor Johansson's been sort of raising this as an issue and that difference between greenfields and brownfields for a very long time.
The last thing is that the CBD living, apart from the Wilson's car parks and bits and pieces, we've got a whole pile of really cool stuff in the CBD now that supports residential living around it. So Riverside Market, supermarket, a range of different things like that. But there is the perception thing. And over the years, in Christchurch as well as other cities, we've been sold the suburban dream. And developer after developer shows us lots of pictures about the lifestyle and those kind of things out in the suburbs and the sprawl and that kind of stuff, and says how great it is. What do we have that, apart from promoting an individual development, in some way sells the benefits of living in the central city? Do we do that in any way apart from people just advertising a place for sale? Or do we have a more strategic way of showing people the benefits of living close to where you work and all of those kind of things?
So the reason that central city living is an important strategic priority to the council is, as you say, it provides affordable accommodation close to places of work and places of living and playing. It is far more sustainable and efficient from a transportation perspective and from a development perspective versus greenfields distance away from places of work or places of play. It offers a number of, particularly where the infrastructure is built, a number of economies of scale and ecological advantages compared to any form of urban sprawl. The council does both supply side incentives, and this is the council's supply side incentives, but equally it also has demand side incentives, which are designed to make the central city an attractive place to live with the types of amenities and the street lighting and the clean streets and parks and playgrounds and things like that. So you need to address both sides of it because supply and demand does work in unison. Yeah,
but we don't seem to be addressing the perception issues. In an active way. So we have people paying millions of dollars on advertising saying live out there, and we don't have a strategy. The
council website, so it's not the council's role to promote any particular individual development. The council's website certainly does focus on CBD living, and there's excellent examples. So we've got the amenity value, we've got the links in the council website, and we've got the examples of the value and things like that. But we're a part player in this. The market also needs to respond, and the market will do a better job than what the council will at promoting any individual development.
I'm not talking about individual developments.
I actually think, I mean, the issue is, I understand it, but I think that we've really got to focus on the paper in front of us. That wider issue, which is around Project 8011 or 8011 or whatever it's called, we've really got to reach into the community and into the private sector to own that, because councils can't sell the dream of living in the CBD. I mean, I can, but it's not a council function, core function, and we need to partner with these business organisations. That's why I've been meeting with the Central City Business Association. That's why I've been talking to neighbourhood residents groups in the 4 avenues. We need to give them the tools to do the regeneration planning that needs to happen, and we need to invite developers to partner with us in a way that doesn't really exist. We've got 1 year of the Regeneration Act left, and I think we've got to really, really up the ante, because this is something that we could drive if we put our shoulder to the wheel, to use somebody else's example of a very large rock sitting in the middle of the city that needs everyone to put their shoulder to the wheel. So, Jake, did you want to talk about your amendment?
Yeah, so the foreshadowed.
The foreshadowed one.
Is basically the same as the staff recommendation, except it puts an expiry date on the scheme, 4 months, which makes up for the post. Oh, thank you, Joe. I was just talking with Joe about when councillors don't switch on their microphone, and so that 4 months makes up for the impacts of COVID-19 and takes care of any of those in-train developments.
Great. Good. All right. And the first one, the original motion, that doesn't expand. It still has a drop dead, as it were, with the money. So it still comes to an end when the money goes. This one comes to an end when the time goes or the money goes, whichever comes first.
Both see the end of the commercial development, and both also have the covenant in place.
Right. Good. All right, Yanni.
Thank you. I was just interested, we kind of heard that the competition isn't the suburban, the greenfields, it's more the inner city fringe. And I mean, given our kind of key strategy around intensification, around activity centres, I'm just interested in what you think this subsidy would do to that policy. If it's just taking away one thing that we're trying to achieve to encourage it into the central city.
We don't have an exclusive focus on intensification around key activity centres. We have and the central city is the primary key activity centre for the city, so that has the most enabling zoning in terms of intensification, followed by the vicinity around the key activity centres. So I think the question of who the competition is depends to some extent on where the demand is coming from. And for families seeking a first home, they're probably not the clientele that is seeking central city living. Hence why some of the things like school zoning is less of a sensitivity factor for central city living than it is for other locations, in that they're more likely to go with a comparatively cheaper price point, some distance from the city. But I think Grant's probably correct that there's more direct competition around the inner suburbs from the central city that still offer some degree of amenity value and ability to access the city centre and work environments relatively easy. And so the question, I think, for council is, does it wish to change the prioritisation that it currently has, which is central city first, key activity centres second, last greenfield development further from the city.
Right. And I just was interested in, have you looked at how much the properties that have had the subsidy have sold for in the central city versus the equivalent selling for in those inner city fringe areas?
No, and I don't know that you'd get a apples with apples comparison, but you know, there's been apartments sold in the central city that have received the subsidy for I think high threes is probably about as low as they've gone, but up to, I don't know, $1 million plus. And you'll get the same in the fringe area, the same range. So it's very difficult to compare one with the other.
But wouldn't we want to know who, like, I mean, if it's $1 million plus, why would we be subsidising that? Clearly that's not around housing affordability.
It's a supply side incentive. So in the first instance, it's there to get the development over the line in terms of starting. Where that funding eventually lands, is it could land in a whole range of places. So it's about getting buildings on the ground.
And I think Lindsay made a good point that the greater the price, the less sensitivity there is. In
Exactly.
$10,000 or $20,000 contribution at $1 million is far less of a percentage than.
And that's why I guess I was trying to understand where it's been going, because if we don't understand that, how can we ensure that the subsidy is actually going towards creating the houses being built versus actually not making a difference at all.
Yeah,
And I would have thought price point
we know,
was one of the
there's a
key.
triangle. Lindsay had it on
Right.
an X and Y axis. As your price goes up, your quantity decreases. So we
But
know
do we-
that the value
Right.
of $1 million apartments. We know that the sale of $1 million apartments is less than the sale of apartments at lower price points. So that's easy enough to do. What it doesn't necessarily differentiate is that they are an apples and oranges comparison.
Right, okay. And just the final, two final questions. One was just, we heard around the issue of people that have received this previously who have used that for Airbnb. Was there anything in the contract that, or the agreement when we give out the rebate, that required people to not make it available for commercial accommodation?
No.
So once they get the subsidy, there's no requirement that it's for the purpose of which we've got it for.
Well, the council, either of these two motions, either of these two options here, can be applied. So remember, the subsidy is rebated at the final building completion, when the DC would otherwise be paid. There's a number of developments in train that can be retrospectively applied to. The developer's point was retrospective application of the of a new rule makes it very challenging, particularly in pre-sales.
What I was trying to understand is we had someone that say we should go and check for the ones that we gave it out to that are not being used for the purpose of which it was given out, and we should try and claim that back. I understand from
to do that. It wasn't
a
prohibited.
resource consent point of view and a district plan point of view that actually these properties may not be in breach of that. What I don't understand is from a contractual point of view, we're providing a subsidy to provide X, whether there's any way in which
Our
that can
current
be
development contributions policy is designed specifically for residential development. So if people have claimed the rebate, I mean, I think that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
If they've claimed the rebate, but their intention is to use the property and they have used the property for Airbnb, does that then make them eligible to retain the rebate or to keep or to even claim the rebate?
We don't believe so because there was no contract precluding them from doing that in the past, whereas the covenant is that
the
contract.
rule,
do that if you're
the
giving out a
reason we
scheme.
brought the rebate in was to encourage residential development,
Yes.
not Airbnb.
So remember, your rebate is afforded to the property developer. The property developer doesn't use the property per se. The
No,
owner
but
of
the
the property,
developer in question, let's be honest, does actually market the property and then has a marketing company that takes it over to run it as Airbnb for the investor.
Yeah, so we can get some legal advice on it, but I think it's a
I
stretch.
think you should. I think
it's a
that's the
stretch.
It
question
was
we
just
were
a
asked
concern that was
today,
raised.
Yep.
Yeah,
and we should follow that up.
yeah.
Thank you.
And the only other question was in regards to sort of the priorities that we have as a council, given our financial situation and given our own state of our own housing, why are you still recommending that this should be a priority, given everything else that we've just been through in terms of the annual plan?
I think
Why wasn't this seen as a saving to fund the other things that we have as kind of core council business?
Well, I think we've answered a number of times your second part of the question on the perception of this as a saving, and I think Leanne addressed it in her comments earlier on. The council has a housing policy that seeks to provide housing along a continuum for everyone, and what this seeks to do is encourage supply-side solutions along a particular part of the continuum, and generally by the time you're in the central city, you heard Gavin say from high 300s, nowadays probably more commonly around 450 upwards. So the council has a range of other solutions, so I don't think, but ultimately it's your deliberations, that the council has ever specifically said it only wants to address one part of the continuum. Actually, it's tried to address the entirety of the continuum.
All right, so Pauline, thank you.
The covenant, 3 questions around that. Who would pay for the covenant? is it a large cost? What is the cost of a covenant? And would it be feasible to have a covenant with an end date where it expires, which might address the concern that the grant had about putting off potential buyers? It could be 3 years, 5 years or something like that. So that's 3 questions.
The council would fund the preparation of a template covenant, which would then reduce the cost for developers who subsequently used that template to apply the covenant to their particular property. Our understanding is that registering the covenant would cost a developer around about $500 to $800. And they would do that on the parent title. And our understanding is that will cascade automatically when that title is subdivided. But that specific point is something we need to check with the council's solicitors. A covenant can have a termination date. That would be entirely up to the council to decide. We have not recommended a termination date because the council can decide at any time in the future that it wants to treat things differently, and it could decide 5 years from now to lift all covenants. So it just gives you a bit more flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so just in terms of proceedings, so I'm just trying to work out, have I got that right in terms of wanting to have, we'll have an overarching debate, but then can you just tell me how to present the resolution so that we don't have a sort of a drop dead position that no one can reclaim afterwards?
If you want, you've got a motion on the table, propose perhaps the staff recommendation.
Yep.
And a foreshadowed motion. Have your debate. If
Yep.
the first debate is lost, then you can put a foreshadowed motion.
Okay, right, that's good. Thank you. All right, so I'll open it up for debate.
Sorry, can I just check process-wise? If the staff recommendation, because the staff recommendation includes the commercial closing.
They all do.
Yeah, so they
Both
both
are
do.
the
But if the original staff recommendation falls over, then the next resolution needs 75%.
It's a foreshadowed, no it doesn't, it's a foreshadowed motion. So it doesn't need to be, no, because we're not recommitting the motion, we've got a foreshadowed motion.
Okay.
If
A
this
different one.
motion fails, then there is a foreshadowed motion.
That includes the
Yeah.
same
It's a
things.
different motion.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
part of it's the same.
So, does anyone want to say anything? Otherwise I'll just put, yep, Yanni?
Look, I don't think anyone is really against having people live in our central city. I know as a former central city resident, one of the attractions in our central city in Christchurch was the fact that generally rents were actually quite reasonable compared to many other places around the world. So I know as a young student, when I came back from overseas, living in the central city was something that I could afford. And there were many other people that I know in my age group that did something similar. They'd often study at the Polytech or university, and they'd live in the central city. And it was a real bohemian sort of atmosphere, with mainly older places that have been subdivided into little apartments for people. But I think the reality is, as a council, that there are many much smarter ways in which we should incentivise development in the central city. And I would suggest that way, which could be seen as rates neutral rather than as a rates cost, which, let's be clear, this is $800,000 of rates every year that other people in every other part of the city is contributing to. And, you know, that is about making sure that the people that are developing in the very expensive areas of the city, in the green fields, further and further away from the central city, pay the true cost of development for the infrastructure, rather than currently at the moment, and this is where I totally endorse what the Williams Corporation comments were in the paper. Why are development contributions so high in our central city if we want people to build and develop there? And we can change that. We could change that and have a much better situation that was enduring over the long term than having to fund the solution out of rates. So I'm opposed to this scheme continuing. I don't think we can afford it. You look at our current financial state, look at the situation we've had when we've gone through our OPEX and our CAPEX, and look at the things that we're currently cutting. Subsidising $1 million apartments should not be seen as a priority at this time for us as a city. We have our own social housing, 5 complexes that I'm aware of that have been put on hold, mothballed, boarded up, not being used. If you want to talk about rates of return around investment, putting some of this money into getting some of those open and attracting the government income-related rent subsidy through leasing it to the trust or some other way would be a far better return on our investment than simply sitting on units when we know there's a huge demand for social housing in our city that's not currently being addressed. So I won't support this scheme today, not because I don't want to see development happen in the central city, but because I believe we cannot afford it and there are other ways of doing it that are rates neutral.
Okay, Pauline?
Yeah, just briefly, I just want to say that I think this has been actually quite good. We've heard evidence that it has supported residential development in the city, which is what it was for. We've put $13 million into it so far. I like the Jake's amendment because it actually puts an end date. Grant said he would be happy with 4 months. I think it looks after people who've got things in train at the moment, and it gives us surety that that's an end point. So I'll be supporting Jake's motion today.
Jake?
Yeah. So look, both of these schemes are active in my ward, and I've been an outspoken sort of critic of them in the past, and that's why I've formulated this motion to bring the scheme to an overdue end. You know, the original intention of this scheme was, in my view, a good one, get more people living in our CBD, and all the associated environmental and economic benefits that would bring. But as a submitter said, there's huge inefficiency in this scheme, and developers like Grant clearly aren't doing anything wrong, but others are pocketing the cash. And that's money we could be using to get our CBD working again in other ways. And Yanni is also correct, there is a rates cost to this. Finance staff have confirmed that to me. But as I've, what have I got? And look, constantly we're told we cannot increase DCs as a way of disincentivising development in greenfield areas. We can't then turn around and say we can lower or waive DCs in brownfields areas as a way to stimulate the CBD. The two arguments are compatible with one another. And look, obviously, we don't charge the correct amount for our DCs in the CBD. That truly reflects the cost of the existing infrastructure, but there is an infrastructural cost with developing in the CBD, and we, yeah. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I won't. But all I will say is, look, this smacks of corporate welfare at a time when we as a council are looking to tighten our belt, and whether that was the intention or not, that's what it is. So the motion put by the Mayor and seconded by Sam will continue to hand out millions of dollars to developers like Williams Corp. So we're winding this down, but we're doing it in good order.
Sam?
Thank you very much, Jake. That must be 2 headlines in one day. That's fantastic. Look, in terms of this, I fully support the Mayor's position, which I actually think the staff have compromised from the original paper that come through. If you think about it, the main concern was around the need to exclude Airbnb in Christchurch, in the CBD, and they've gone away and come up with a practical solution to actually do that. I think we would be doing a severe disservice to the people of our city if we didn't encourage investment in the CBD. We need, and you'll know this as the local councillor, severe intensification in terms of people living there. The retailers tell us that, everyone tells us that, and so I think there's a strong argument that while there is a rates impact of this, as staff have confirmed, the higher the capital value we can put back into the city, the less impact it has on everyone. So I think this has a lot of ticks next to it in terms of not only achieving good financial outcomes for the city in terms of increasing capital value, but it ticks at the same time, I think, social and environmental impacts as well. I actually think probably the best thing, and I hope everyone is persuaded by this, was Lindsay Carswell's presentation, which I think showed the graph, and it basically said if you lower the price, you'll increase the quantity or the demand for it. So I think that's an absolute no-brainer. And when you think about it, any development or builder in the city literally works back from that. They have their price, it's literally a line item in it. So, it's economics 101. The higher the inputs, the higher the outputs, and I think we should use a lever we can to really change that. So I just plead with councillors to show some commercial acumen and back this at a time when the city needs people and I think investment.
Catherine and Aaron, Phil.
I think, Sam, you spot really well. If you want to discourage investment and residential development in the inner city, don't support this paper. But if you actually want these guys who are actually really passionate about Christchurch to get on with their job and offer affordable housing, please support this paper. If you want them in the industry to maintain their jobs, to help deliver affordable housing, support this paper. And if you want people to be able to actually afford these houses, live in the inner city, and in turn support our local businesses who are really struggling and really hit hard by what's gone on recently, please do support this paper.
Aaron.
Yeah, I'll just speak to one of the bits that hasn't been mentioned, and there's the deputations around it, and that is the Airbnb and the covenant that's going on. I think that's good. We've got a bit of work to do on this, and it's been raised for the last couple of years at annual plans. I know in other districts, Lakes District for instance, if you go to buy a property there now and your intention is that it's short-term accommodation, you are rated for that. It's really, really clear. I don't get why we are not doing that. We just need to create an even playing field between the motels, hotels, and anyone that's going into the Airbnb market. I mean, we shouldn't be ashamed to have Airbnb in our city because people staying in short-term accommodation will go out and eat. But you don't want Airbnb kind of hiding and all stealthy around your city like, oh, I bought this apartment and I can get away with not paying rates. They should be paying commercial rates because it's commercial property and they should be made safe like the deputation was. So in the LTP, I think that's one of the things we have to, along with the other 150 items I think we're up to currently, might be 180, that we need to get our teeth into. But and it spreads the rates around. And an empty property, just to be clear, pays clear land rates now, and when you put something on it, you then pay a capital rate on top of, and that lowers other people's rates. It doesn't increase the rate pool, it shares the load.
That's right. Sorry.
Aaron's been reading my notes. For a small little bit of money to help these guys get the rebate to get it done, turning a shingly, grassy paddock into something that will then pay lots more rates. If it's got 40 units on it, 30 units, it doesn't really matter. You get a lot more back in the long run. And exactly what Catherine said, a lot of people have invested a lot of money in their shops and pubs and what have you in town, and we don't owe it to, well, we do owe it to them. We said we get 20,000 people in, and if this helps get a few more in, the better we'll be off. Thank you.
Andrew?
Thank you. The two arguments in favour of this seems to be that it increases affordability. There's certainly been a link made there in a number of debate items this afternoon. I haven't seen any proof whatsoever that, and it would be difficult to prove this, and we've heard answers to questions that have been asked around this as well, whether the incentive does in fact increase the affordability of the units, whether the incentive goes into the front pocket of an eventual purchaser, or whether it goes into the back pocket of a developer. And that brings me to the second claim, which is that this incentivises development. There have been a number of media articles that have claimed that, you know, a certain number of properties have been developed because of this incentive. And the implication, of course, is that they wouldn't have been developed without this incentive. We don't know that. They may have been built anyway. The prices to the eventual purchasers may have been the same anyway. I would like to think that the investment that council has put into this so far has both incentivised development and increased affordability, but we'll never know whether that was the case or whether it wasn't. I'm supportive of the motion put by Jake this afternoon, so the foreshadowed motion. I think what that does is to bring the scheme to a close in a respectful and sensible way, with a transition to an end point, which is easily understood, that respects that some developers have got developments which are in train, have been planned with this in mind, but it does bring this to what I consider to be a timely end point.
Sorry, James and Sarah. Oh, Sarah.
Thank you. DC rebates and have been a business as usual proposal for what has been a non-business as usual environment. And rather than people slamming council for deciding to draw a line under it if we do, we should be congratulated for investing $13 million so far. And we are doing what we said we would do, and we have let it run as long as we said we would. It is time for something different though. We have a pretty homogenous group of developments at the moment, and how do we get accommodation for a wider range of people beyond the boomer or young professional couples? How do we enable a more mixed-use conversions, loft style like they do overseas, to keep costs down in areas where we still have existing buildings? Families should want to be living in the central city. It should be easy, especially with Hagley Park and Margaret Mahy Playground. And the most common household type in New Zealand as of this year is a single-person household, and we need developments that are affordable for singles. And let's be clear, developments where there is no additional infrastructure demand have DC credits to be used and don't pay a cent. It's where additional demand is placed on the network that we charge DCs. Many residential developments have come in without funding from us. And let's be clear, it is economics 101. There's no point producing a product if you don't sell the dream. And I believe it is absolutely our role to promote central city living, like we promote exploring our central city or we promote events. They are all things that enhance perceptions and seek to change behaviours for the good of the city as a whole. For me, the key development that we should continue to support with a DC rebate is Madras Square, but we have a policy that allows for special developments like this one to have a one-off rebate, and it's more than likely to qualify. It is a different, more diverse development that will meet a range of needs and bring a different range of people into the central city, and that's the type that we should be supporting. Thank you.
James?
Kia ora. I've said before that I've been a resident in the central city when I was a single man in my 40s, and it was a fantastic experience. And I recognise you're living in the city, Councillor Johansson, but that wasn't living, that was flatting, with respect. With respect. It is a fantastic place to live, there's no doubt about it. And, you know, we've put a lot of effort into encouraging people to invest in the central city so that we can have more people in there. I question whether families would want to live in the central city, to be honest, but that's another thing for another decade or so. Look, Sam gave a good economics 101 lecture about the line item and the cost of building and so on. The thing is that, I'll add to that, the selling price of anything, but particularly these properties, and when you take into consideration all the inputs for building these properties, the selling price is always going to be an amount where the seller, the developer, sees it as being too low, and the purchaser, the homeowner, sees it as being too high. That's where it comes to the crossing of the two curves. So we talk about affordable properties, housing in the central city. It's not happening because there are unsold properties, and the reason for that is that the developer wants more than the market will stand. Sometime it's going to end up where the market will be able to pay, or the developer will come down to the market. So the unsold properties are showing that we don't have affordable housing in the central city. I also note with what Jake said about Grant, the developer that was on earlier, he's not doing anything wrong, but others are. And it's good that we're putting in a covenant to correct that for those who are not doing the right thing. And so, and also the situation about having a cut-off date in the foreshadowed motion is not necessary, because this one says that this will continue until either the funding limit is reached or the council decides to close the scheme. We can do it any time we want. So I'm voting in favour of this.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? I'll just close off the debate then. Look, thank you very much. We have actually been consulting on Christchurch's Airbnb industry, so we are going to get on top of the issues that relate to Airbnb. We know that that process has been delayed by the lockdown and by the sort of extent of the focus on the immediate response to the COVID-19 crisis. So it is on our agenda. We have got things in plan. We have been consulting. It had a very high level of participation, and that's because there is a lot of interest in Airbnb. And I want to thank staff for taking away the paper that we had on our draft agenda, on our agenda. I pulled it off the agenda because I knew that it was the narrative was being taken from us by people debating about what we were going to debate rather than actually seeing that we wanted to resolve the problem. And I really appreciate the people who came here today, who'd taken the time and the trouble to read what had been proposed and to give us some comfort about the concept of the covenant that we put on these titles in order to provide that protection. This is not an open-ended, as James has just said. It is just simply to the end of the dollars that we set aside to draw down against. So it doesn't provide us with more money for our budget for next year if we stop it on the 30th of June. There is no more money that just magically appears on the table. I think others have mentioned quite rightly that when we get additional development, when we get the level of intensification that the central city is designed to support, not just here but anywhere in the world, you actually do end up reducing the load on other parts of the city because the benefit of that development is shared across the board. As we know, it doesn't increase the amount that's coming in, it actually shares the load across the board. So I'm in favour of this. I think that staff took away the paper that had the intention expressed, but have come back and have delivered a very practical solution which enables us just to allow the money that we had originally set aside for this to occur. Now, I've got a saying in life which is timing is everything. And at a time when we have got businesses screaming, at a time when we've got places like Riverside Market, places, like Cashel Mall, like all of our central city places that, they've been waiting for the convention centre. There won't be any conventions at the end of this year. That's going to have to wait till next year. The stadium is still coming, but it's still a long way off. So the Metro Sports facility has been delayed, so that there is this sense of, we've had this ambition for so many people to live in our central city. We've even got Project 8011. I live in 8013, so I don't know how 8011 doesn't include where I live, but it's the intention behind it is fantastic, and it is all about momentum. I love the fact that Grant McKinnon said the word momentum, because we did feel like people had their shoulder to the wheel. In actual fact, some of the decisions that were taken in terms of the blueprint and the focus on the narrowing of the core of the central city, although it had some great benefits, the downside was the increase in the cost of the land. And when you push up property prices, the ability to develop is diminished. This is a significant contribution, particularly to those developers that are developing apartments and townhouses that have a little bit more room to move, so that they're not as intense as some of the others, but they are providing a really good, and that makes $45,000 to $50,000 difference on the buying price, and that's what can make the difference when you see those Carlton Mill and Merivale and St Albans and all of those areas surrounding the central city, all within walking distance of the central city, well within cycling distance of the central city, and you get so much more for your money when you move out rather than moving in. So this is a contribution. It's sending a message at the right time. We're not putting any more money on budget to cover it. So that I would please ask people to support the proposal that's in front of us. So thank you. So perhaps if you'd like to do a poll of the... And I'll put the motion.
Councillor Templeton. Councillor McClellan?
No.
Councillor MacDonald?
Yes.
Councillor Johansson?
No.
Councillor Galloway?
Yes.
Councillor Daniels?
Yes.
Councillor Coker?
No.
Councillor Chen? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. No. The Mayor?
Yes.
Councillor Scandrett?
Yes.
Councillor Major? Councillor Kewen?
Yes.
Councillor Davidson?
Yes.
Councillor Cotter? No. Councillor Chu? Councillor Turner?
No.
That's 9 votes for and 7 votes against.
Thank you. That's carried. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of that hard work. Much appreciated.